to reach out to non-member countries and developing countries. So we do sometimes have non-member countries participating in our work as observers. We also sometimes do work related to our non-member countries, and we engage in cooperation and partnership with other intergovernmental organizations who have a broader membership, so that we can put our work at their service. Now, the next part of my talk is to explain a little bit our perspective on what information society is and what the knowledge economy is. And previous speaker, Wayne, presented the World Bank's perspective, and you'll recognize that there's a great similarity. The first essential in the knowledge economy is sound economic fundamentals. It's not just macroeconomic policy, but it also means things like sound public governance and corporate governance. But there are four pillars that corresponding to the four areas that Wayne explained earlier of the knowledge society. This stems from OECD's work that's been done over the last few years to try to explain differences in the economic performance of the different countries in the OECD area. Why is it that some countries seem able to harness technology better than others in order to get a stronger growth rate and stronger productivity performance? Well, the first pillar is that of innovation, a strong innovation system. And if you like, the capital of that pillar is R&D and a sound science system. The second one is the use of general purpose technologies, GPTs, chief of which are information and communication technologies, but increasingly biotechnology and nanotechnology coming along. Now, these are characterized by the fact that these general purpose technologies are very vigorous and dynamic economic sectors in themselves, accounting for up to 10% of the economy in some developed countries. But what is important is not only the development of those sectors, it's the impact that those sectors they have on the other 90% of the economy. So their general purpose, invigorating all parts of industry and services. The third pillar is the human factor, human capital, and chief among these are the highly qualified workforce, the scientists and engineers, the researchers. And the fourth pillar is the enterprise dynamics, the entrepreneurship, the vigor of the not only the small and, of the small and medium enterprises and how they enter global markets, but also the activities of multinational enterprises and their behavior too. And this, if you like, is holding up the edifice of something. And these are kind of popular expressions, and they go out of fashion, they come into fashion as you go along, but my point is that the four pillars holding them up are constant. And this is sometimes described as the new economy. It's the knowledge-based economy, and if we're particularly focusing on the impacts of information technology, it's the information society. Now, this is a temple. It looks a little bit like a Greek temple being held up by some pillars, but there's a strong wind blowing through the temple, and this can be disturbing, but it also can be very refreshing and invigorating, and that is the wind of globalization. And you can see that all of these pillars of the knowledge economy are affected by globalization. The globalization of research and development and the implantation of research facilities in different countries. The internet is the epitome of the globalization impact of information communication technologies. The mobility of the highly skilled and is crucial for human capital and, of course, multinational enterprises too. the globalization vector of what I've called here enterprise dynamics. Now, there are some additional themes to consider here. The four pillars of the knowledge society hold up, if you like, imagine this as the lintel running across the four pillars, holding up the knowledge society, and that is, what they've got in common is that all four of these pillars create intellectual assets. Whether it be embodied research outputs such as patents, copyrights, and so forth. The information technologies are creating software, the human capital, self-evident, the tacit knowledge that human capital has, and the value creation by enterprises. There's also something that I would draw attention to, which is one of the foundations. You remember I said the foundations were economic fundamentals. But there's also something else which people are now realizing more and more is crucial. And that is the whole business of security, safety, and trust. And this holds for societies as well as economies. And if you lack security, safety, and trust, this imposes a lot of friction in the system, and we can't hope to achieve the economic and social objectives. And the wind blowing through the temple, the wind of globalization that I said, is that it's important for the OECD anyway. The developed countries, as conceived at present, have to engage with the new economic powerhouses growing in the world. So our fear is that our Greek temple, which looks like that, full of history, but a little bit crumbling and magnificent to look at, and it could look like this, brand spanking new, obviously Eastern, Asian some way, maybe Chinese, and with a lot more pillars holding it up. And our challenge is whether it is or, in other words, an alternative, or and, can we engage and develop a new global economic and social system where we're working together. Now, this is a little bit of a bureaucratic slide. It's the next part of my presentation, which is how we deal with information communication technologies at the OECD. I go through this very quickly. The point is that we engage senior officials in our member countries in a number of working parties. I put the titles in there: telecommunications, information economy, security, privacy, indicators and measurement, just to indicate the subject areas that we're working with. The kind of things that we contribute towards a holistic, more horizontal view of the knowledge society, in things like the determinants of economic growth. What is it that drives economic growth, and how is that changing? How is globalization affecting structural change, and how can we adapt to that and benefit from it? And how can we better invest in intellectual assets and deploy them in order to create value? And the last bullet there, it shows that it's not just my department, but the e-economy runs right across the economic studies of the OECD, e-taxes, e-government, e-education, you name it. And that includes the involvement of our Development Assistance Committee, that's the DAC, the DAC, which coordinates overseas development assistance among our member countries, and trying to raise the profile of information communication technologies as an integral part of development strategies. Some quick remarks about the internet then and now, because after all, this is a conference about the internet, past, present, and future. I just picked out 4 salient points here. It's not the whole story, but just 4 salient points. One of them is that of infrastructure and the continued application of Moore's law, the rapid decline in prices, the move towards internet protocol and convergence, and the second point, the impact of the internet has transformed totally. The growth of the ICT sector is now an integral part of all of the developed economies and should be for developing countries too. The emphasis on trust, which I referred to earlier, and the need to address the issue of what this means for digital divides and ICT for development. So, then and now, 1997, Garry Kasparov lost a chess match to a computer called Deep Blue. In 2006, the PlayStation 3 is using chips derived from Deep Blue technology and has just as much muscle as that computer which defeated the world chess champion. Then and now, the price of always-on kilobytes per second, 1997, 36 US cents, 2005, 1 cent. Then and now, the growth of traffic. This is voice over internet protocol. This is something which is deeply concerning the traditional voice telephony industry. It was a toy back in 1997. It's an important market player in 2004, and 2005 figure would be way off the graph. Then and now, Amazon.com. This is one of the survivors of the internet boom. 1997 against 2004. Just look at, well, of course the red bar is the sales, but look at the blue bar. This is the negative in 1997 and strongly positive in 2004. Internet access is affecting it is an integral part of all businesses, and this is by size class. A little difficult to read, but if you just look across the top, the gray bars represent large firms, and the dark blue bars, small firms. And these are pretty high numbers, and so this shows the importance of the internet for enterprises. Now, the other thing I mentioned was security. Now, this is a well-known cartoon from the New Yorker magazine in about 1995. Everybody in this room has seen it before. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Now, yes, well, not only do they know that you're a dog, they know everything about you. Including some pretty personal data. And so this is obviously a joke, but it is a joke which has some serious implications that the information society has some important privacy and security concerns. And we need to address that in order to construct the information society in the future that we all want to live in and what we want our children to live in. And it's moving very, very quickly, a little bit faster than is comfortable for members of the older generation, such as myself. So, just some quick statistics. This is the frightening part. This is the security and trust part. Complaints of fraud are becoming more common. Attacks are escalating. These are things like root compromise, user compromise, denial of service, malicious logic, virus, worms, misuse of resources, spam, and so forth. Spyware implanted in people's computers, moving very fast over the last 5 years. So, the OECD has engaged itself very firmly with the World Summit on the Information Society. As this is a developed summit, and the OECD represents the governments of the developed countries, we don't have that very much universal credibility in the WSIS. So we try to provide our technical knowledge and work through our member countries rather than playing an upfront role ourselves. So the 4 areas that we're working very hard on, the first is understanding the information society, measuring and analysis, and we're very vigorous partners in a project on measuring information and communication technologies for development, which is basically building up statistical capacity building for measuring the information society in developing countries, and also the analysis of the impacts. Our belief is that if we provide enough evidence of the benefits of information technology for the economy and society, and also some insights into how it works, then the whole process will go faster. We've provided inputs into the 2 pieces of unfinished business from the first phase of the WSIS, the Working Group on Internet Governance and the Task Force on Financial Mechanisms. We're contributing to the debate on security and trust building, and the effort on struggling against the scourge of spam. And regarding access to data and information, we've produced a number of papers that we've submitted to the WSIS on the importance of access to data information for information for developing countries and constructing a global information society, and showing how this is changing and how some new thinking and new business models and new approaches in regulation are needed. We'll be coming back to access to publicly funded research data later in this conference tomorrow. So after the WSIS, the objectives of the WSIS are entirely consistent with the objectives of the organization that I represent. Our role is mainly complementary. We'll be seeking partnerships with other stakeholders, and we're very realistic about what we can bring to the table, but we won't hesitate to do that. And these are some of the areas that we're thinking about in the follow-up. Continue our work on statistics, measurement, and analysis. We don't know how WGIG is going to work out, but if there is a forum set up to deal with internet governance after the WSIS, we will stand ready to participate. If there's a policy forum such as a UN Global Alliance, which has been discussed, we're open to participation in that. And we will continue to push for the full integration of information communication technologies into official development assistance strategies. And that's it. If you need to further information, there's a website address there and an email address there. And if there's anything you want to come back to me on after this meeting, please use it. Thank you once again.
Just one burning question, just one, if there is. Yes, one burning question.
I don't mean to sound rude, but I spend a lot of time on the internet, and none of it is commercial time, and most of it I'm learning something. And I feel that the internet is this great treasure because it brings me something new from around the world. I just feel from the presentation that it's hard to learn something new if you know so much. That your organization is valuable and has spent a lot of time doing many things. But I thought the internet brings to all of us the respect for the rest of the world and for the ability to learn something. And I wonder how you integrate that into your relationship with the rest of the world. That is, how do you learn from the world as well as bring something to teach it?
Well, I do apologize that if I gave you the impression of arrogance and giving the impression that the OECD is way out in front and any kind of information flow is one-way traffic. And I think that is not true. And what I was trying to stress is that we've learned a lot in accompanying the internet in its progress from its birth in our in the developed countries, but we don't know much about how this affects developing countries. And the more we get into that, the more we realize that we've got a lot to learn about how this actually works. And it would, if ever we were so presumptuous as to believe that it was just a teaching exercise, as soon as we get into it, we realize that is not true. And so in our relations with non-member countries, we seek partnerships with other organizations and also try to learn with what really happens, because both economies are quite different and societies are quite different. And we think that by bringing this together, there can be a very fruitful cross-fertilization of activities. Let me give you just one example. In the OECD until a couple of years ago, the issue of sustainable development, which is a crucial issue for the planet, was a matter essentially for developing countries. And that we could go on running seminars about water management, about energy efficiency and things like that. And it was essentially a developing country issue. The realization has come that, it's not. It's a planetary issue, and it's absolutely crucial for the developed countries as well. And that the lessons we learn from the developing countries are going to be applicable in the developed countries too. That's just one example from the science and technology field, but I could cite others from the information technology and communications field too. There are enormous learning experiences that we can have. I hope that went some way to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the presentation will also be available in the website, and we could also interact with John even after this session. I want to call our last speaker this morning, Kathy Smith. Kathy Smith is a Deputy Director, International Council for Science, ICSU. He has a background in biochemistry. His organization represents science academies and international science unions. In fact, it is one of the most representative bodies worldwide. Its best programs in environmental change. Kathy Smith has been with this organization for 4 years, and before he joined the organization, he was working with the Medical Research Council in UK, where he was the head of international affairs. Welcome, Smith.
So, what do I do, Wes, to get this to work?
Turn it up, turn it up.
So, as our chairperson said, I'm from the International Council for Science. The Council's mission is written here. Briefly, we're in the game of trying to strengthen international science for the benefit of society. What's important about ICSU is we really do try and have a global perspective on things. The ICSU membership includes countries from all over the world, international unions that represent all countries. We have a particular emphasis on equity, universality, equal opportunities for everyone to participate in the scientific process. So today, along the theme of the past, present and future, I'll talk a little bit about what happened leading up to Geneva in terms of science. Some of you may already know that, but for those who don't, it may be useful context. a little bit about what ICSU is doing post-Geneva, and then to the future, a little bit of thoughts on potential future needs and priorities. So the World Summit on the Information Society. Quickly, the timetable there, which many of you will know, but it started a long time ago with the first PrepCom in 2002, where I think there were as many people as are in this room in the civil society sector. That group has now grown to thousands who will be at this summit. There was the major summit in Geneva, and here we are now in Tunis. So, why is WSIS of any interest to science? ICSU is a representative body of the international science community. We had to ask ourselves, well, why do we want to bother with WSIS? What's the interest? You know, scientists can do their own thing. Why should we engage in it? It's the first time that UN has tried to tackle the issues of the information society. It's an attempt to bring some sort of international consensus amongst different stakeholders on what the major principles for that information society should be. From the ICSU perspective, we link it directly to the Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg and the role of scientific information in development. And as scientists, we would argue that scientific information is critical to development. I think we've heard from the previous presentations that that's actually a fairly common view, particularly now if we accept the new paradigms of knowledge societies, knowledge economies. And WSIS uniquely tries to bring all the stakeholders together. That sometimes is not easy. I struggled through the preparatory process for the first WSIS, and it's actually very difficult dealing with NGOs advocating for lots of different things, even dealing with different scientific organisations who have their own agendas. And I'll be the first to hold our hand up and say ICSU has its own agenda to some extent. But if we ever want to resolve the challenges ahead of us for the information society, we have to engage with all stakeholders, and we have to reach some sort of agreement on general principles. Also, we think that science is really central, absolutely central to the information society. We heard about the internet. I think the information society, WSIS, is not just about the internet, but there's certainly a lot of focus on that, but most of the major developments that are shaping the information society have come through science, and when I say science, I mean science and engineering, S&T. Science itself is dependent on access to information and data. So we're really self-interested as well. We can't work as scientists unless the information society is convenient for us. And WSIS is a unique opportunity to address the digital divide or the knowledge divide in science, the isolation of many countries from the international science. As I said, we need to engage with other stakeholders, with the private sector, with the governments, with intergovernmental organisations to solve some of the challenges ahead. So what did the scientific community actually do for Geneva? As I say, some of you will know this, so I'll go through it quickly. But there was a partnership of international science organisations. Some of them are named here. Many of them are present in the room. I think also the engineers, WFEO, are missing from this list and perhaps should be, but we tried to form some sort of loose partnership of science organisations. We were there right from the start of PrepCom 1. In 2003, there was a meeting held at UNESCO, but organised by a group of international organisations, led particularly by CODATA, that defined an agenda for action for science in the information society. What are the key issues that, in the ideal information society, that science would like to have seen to? This agenda, the usual mechanisms, it was distributed, etc., published, we had meetings about it. And then in Geneva itself, there were several science events. There was a major event that CERN hosted that I think had quite an impact, that brought together scientists and policymakers. So science was actually pretty visible at the World Summit on the Information Society. This is the corporate bit. This is just advertising for some brochures that ICSU took the lead on preparing. And I actually have copies of these here that can be distributed. But they address specific areas that were felt to be important in the Information Society, and they include the agenda for action, and they sort of give more detail of why these areas are thought to be important. So this agenda for action, what in March 2003 did scientists, and this agenda was defined by a group of international scientists from all over the world. It really was an international meeting. And then it's been circulated all over the world via different networks to get input from scientists. It's fairly simple. It's not high level, low level, or micro detail. The idea at this stage was to try and get policymakers to take these things on board. So the first is fairly obvious, is the issue about infrastructure, but not just the infrastructure, actually affordable infrastructure. The affordability is a real issue. That there are countries where everywhere is networked, but no one can afford to use the networks. But the infrastructure on its own is not good enough. Certainly if we think more about a knowledge society, it's about people. It's about people who can use the information, who can access the information, who can develop the networks, etc. So the need for capacity building. And then the particular issue that there will be a lot of discussion of at this meeting, I think, is the full and open access to public data, to data for research, and also for people who use research results, policymakers, citizens, fishermen, farmers, whatever. And then there are major issues about the, if you like, the chaos of the information society. Everyone, the problems with disappearing URLs. I put together a group that did a strategic review of data and information. At the end of the review, which took 18 months, 3 of the people out of a group of about 15, 3 of them had changed their email addresses. And I couldn't get in touch with them anymore and had to get new email addresses for them. Some of the web references that we use, the URLs no longer exist. So there are real issues about sustainability, about interoperability, standards, etc. Issues about essential data, public health data, health surveys, census data, that in many countries that just don't exist in a usable format. Everyone's concerned about SARS, but if you don't have the basic demographic data, it's very hard to follow what's happening. Equitable access to scientific information. We deliberately use the wording equitable access. There's been a lot of discussion about open access, and in terms of publications and scientific journals, it has a particular definition or definitions. Open access publishing is certainly a very valuable mechanism, but I think the end aim should be equitable access, and open access may be one way, it may be the best way to get to equitable access. At the moment, it's not perfect for everyone, and the issue is really equitable access. Promoting scientific literacy, as we talk about knowledge societies, being scientifically literate will be more and more valuable, and countries that don't have scientifically literate, not just scientists, but citizens, are likely to be more excluded from a knowledge society. Research on ICT use, things like telemedicine. And then in the longer term, a role for scientists in decision making. If this summit ends up, for example, establishing national commissions on the information society, which is a possibility, then it's crucial that scientists engage with those bodies, that scientists are actually involved centrally in the policy-making discussions. It's easy to sit on the outside and throw stones, but if we really want the information society to to be more equitable, to be better for science, to be better for society, then scientists have to get involved and engaged in it. And here's a few of the extracts from the Declaration of Principles, the Plan of Action, which I won't go through them, but the bottom line is that actually science did very well in Geneva. Science is very well represented in the Declaration, in the Plan of Action. And that Declaration and Plan of Action have been signed up to by many, many countries, many of them directly by the heads of states. They may not have realised that they signed up to all these things, but they have. And that's good for science. The trouble is now turning these nice bits of paper, they are very good for science, turning them actually into reality and making use of them. And that's what we've sort of been starting on between Geneva and Tunis. This quickly, again, for those who weren't too involved in Geneva, there's sort of the major issues that weren't resolved. I'm not saying everything was resolved by any means, but the internet governance, freedom of the press, the issues of funding, those are the big issues that will be discussed by in the intergovernmental sessions, hopefully with full participation of civil society, but that we will see. Hopefully with full input from the science community, but that we will see. And then with specific challenges for science, I think there was a lot of discussion about open access publishing, open source software, how much emphasis should be put on those things as the be-all and end-all of science and the information society. Issues about IPR regimes, public domain for science. At one stage, ICSU tried to introduce into one of the preparatory meetings a statement on the importance of open access to data. There was strong opposition from the likes of Hewlett-Packard and the European Commission. And yet actually we don't really have different views. We just have to try and get a consensus. And those sort of statements, people are polarised. The truth is we have to work together to get consensus on what is acceptable to everyone. You know, the private sector, the commercial publishers even, they're not the big bad evil by any means. We have to work with them to get something that is acceptable to everyone. And then the challenge of actually just, now we've got all this stuff on paper, how can we use this at the different levels to really improve the lot of science and the lot of science in society? So what of ICSU, as I say, this is just one example. I don't want to be too corporate about this presentation, but it's an example of what one organisation is trying to do since Geneva. We actually did our own strategic review of what the future priorities and needs for science in terms of scientific data and information are at the global level. I'll give a little bit on that in a couple of minutes. Geneva, that were agreed in Geneva. And ICSU has been trying to get its membership also more active. In some cases that has certainly worked. So this is just because you're probably bored with all the words. This is just again another plug for an ICSU report, our report on scientific data and information, which was published start of the year. And to again add some context to this, why should ICSU be reviewing scientific needs for data and information? ICSU actually has a lot of interest in scientific data and information from a policy and management level through to an operational level. There's a list of those things here. If I take, for example, the International Polar Year, which is a major new international research program, there will be a multi-billion-dollar research program that ICSU is coordinating. There will be huge amounts of data generated from that. The idea is that all the satellites on the polar regions will all focus together in a coordinated way. All that data will be collected. All the fleets will go at the same time to the Arctic and the Antarctic. All that data will be collected. And there's real issues about how that is managed, how that is kept for the next 100 years, how that is made accessible to everyone who wants to work on it. So ICSU has a really big interest in data and information. So in terms of our policies on that, we talk about full and open access to scientific data. That scientific data obviously can be defined different ways, but it's basically data that is important for science. Much of it is not actually collected by scientists. And as I said, when it comes to publications, we talk more about universal and equitable access to scientific publications, which I think is a step along from open access. Open access is a mechanism to get there, and it may end up being a unique mechanism. At the moment it certainly isn't, and there are other ways to also work to achieve universal and equitable access. Access is critical to the information society and to ICSU's role of trying to bridge the knowledge divide. When we talk about access, it's not just access to information from the north, as I think was hinted at in the question at the end of the last presentation. We all have something to learn. It's not one-way information. In science, it's often seen as just providing access to all the journals from the north for the south. That's not the case at all. There's a lot of very good research in the south that us in the north would do a lot better to have access to and to look at. We need to provide stable systems for providing that access. At the moment, there's turmoil to some extent in what is happening in the publishing domain, even in the data collection domain. And there's a real possibility that in the transition from paper to digital, much valuable information will be lost. We need to address that. We need to develop new economic models. Someone has to pay for data collection, someone has to pay for publications, whether it be the author, philanthropists, or traditionally the users. And scientists need to be involved in the development of policies, particularly in relation to IPR and copyright regimes. And the particular needs of scientists in developing countries need to be heard and addressed. Developing countries have not been much involved in the policy lobby for open access publishing, for example, and they have a lot to say. They have different views that we all need to listen to. And when I say developing countries, the whole range of developing countries. China and India, the big developed countries, China, India, Brazil may have one view, but then there are least developed countries that have quite a different worldview that also need to be included in these discussions if we really want to work towards a more equitable and universal information society for science. So, coming out of our review, this strategic review, and you can look in details at the report, what is needed? These are fairly obvious. As I say, this is very much at a macro level. The idea of the review was to look at everything and not just one specific area in detail. But we need long-term planning and investment. Just looking at a solution for the next 6 months is not going to be helpful. We need really a long-term sustainable structure. Data management, we need more data management professionals, and we need to acknowledge the role of professionals in data management. Every scientist that is now coming through, or the new generation of scientists, all know a little bit about data management, but the big issues, as I say, the polar year, that type of managing big data sets, that needs to be done professionally. We need to think about how to do that. There are lots of structures currently in place. ICSU has some of them, the World Data Centers, the some of the services, etc. Many of those were created 50, 60 years ago in a different era, and they need to evolve, they need to be transitioned into something else or closed down and new things created. And we need to think about international, interdisciplinary coordination. As we've heard in the earlier talks, we live in a global society now. I think scientists have, to some extent, taken the lead on being international, collaborating internationally. There's even more need now for us to set good examples of how it can be done. And we need national and international policies that are supportive. And that's why scientists have to get engaged with the likes of WSIS and in discussions with policymakers, etc. So the recommendation from this report, which was put together by a group of international experts from different domains, is that we need I think the report has about 60 different recommendations on what needs to be done. And a report with 60 recommendations is very hard to implement. But actually pulling it all together at the end, what became very obvious was we need a whole new approach to scientific data and information at a global level. We're in a new sort of paradigm now for research. We need to develop a long-term strategic framework for managing data and information as a continuum. And as part of that, the suggestion is that an international forum be created that would bring together the key stakeholders, including the private sector, including some of the key intergovernmental institutions involved in this area, to actually agree on standards, on mechanisms, on structures, etc. And ICSU itself will be establishing a high-level committee to actually look at how that can be brought about. And if you want the reports, and I haven't time here obviously to go into the full detail of them, they're downloadable from the ICSU website, which is here.
Thank you very much for that informative presentation. Can we take one burning question? Yes?
Yeah, my name is Rhonda Haubin, and I've studied the origin and development of the internet and the impact. And what strikes me is a little bit of research, basic research funding ends up giving us something very, very incredible, which is what we have now. There is, I think, what Wesley has mentioned, there's the lack of that support now for that basic research funding. I think that's critical. And the fact that he's had trouble with this conference getting support for it, even though it's critical that there be the discussion of that basic research funding. I didn't hear you speaking to that. I'm happy to hear you talking about equitable instead of open. But I think underlying it all everywhere, there's this downgrading of the significance and importance of basic research and of learning the lessons from the internet. It was not Department of Defense funding for a military project. It was where the basic research could be done in the US, and there were very substantial researchers working on collaborative developments. And so, I mean, even that story isn't known. Is there some way that you can, that your organization deals with this denigration of basic research and the very basic problem that it's not the commercial can be relied on to support the basic research. It's good they help, but it needs a much more public and governmental support base, and unless there's that recognition again, I think we stymie everything.
Yeah, I mean, I would be the first to argue the importance of basic research. ICSU's constituency is basic research, is all publicly funded, non-governmental in academia. I would also caution making a clear distinction between basic and applied. That it's really hard to make that distinction anymore. most research, the speed of innovation is such now that research is very rapidly applied. In developing countries, it's very hard to argue that you just have basic blue skies, ivory tower research. There's no doubt that basic scientific disciplines and the basic inquiry, hypothesis-driven research is fundamental to the knowledge society, but every country has to decide to what level it can support it. You know, whether everyone should be sending people into space or setting up synchrotrons or CERN equivalents is very questionable. There are issues about at an international level what the infrastructure should be. Every country needs to have basic scientific disciplines, but then they also have to have strategies and priorities, and it's public money and it's limited, and public want it to go into certain things. So basic research is absolutely crucial, but I think we do ourselves a disservice if we argue for basic as though it's something magic dissociated from the rest of the world. It's not.
Somebody has a very burning question. Yes.
I had a question for John and Kartaj. Kartaj was talking about solar and northern science. John was talking about strong innovation. Wes and I are studying scientific culture of the core countries like Australia, Japan, and the United States, and its effect on third world scientific culture. I just wanted to know if there were some details or something that you could be more said about what is strong innovation or what is strong science. What are the parameters for strong science?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer straight off. I think Carthage gave part of the answer when he stressed the juxtaposition of basic science and applied science, and how dangerous it is to make a firm distinction between these two. But I think the strong innovation systems, there are many things that come together to make a strong innovation system. One of them is strong fundamental research. We neglect fundamental research at our peril. The second is a strong incentive for the private sector to actually perform research. Another one is the role of human resources in a research system, and running across all of these is the need to have flexibility in the system and mobility in the system. And finally, while I have the floor, I could maybe complement the answer the previous question gave, that in addition to basic research and applied research, I would also make a plea for accompanying scientific and technological research with economic and social research about how that affects the world that we live in and what the impacts are. And I've noticed a tendency which I don't agree in, is to neglect the importance of socio-economic research in conceiving programs to support scientific and technological research.
Okay, thank you very much. We are just about to wind up. Allow me to just ask one question that I don't need to be answered. I come from the developing countries, and this is to all the speakers of the session. I see globalization as a bus that is passing and picking people as it passes. And once you get inside, you can access information, knowledge. You can get the fundamentals of development. You can get to the pillars. You can get the science-based knowledge and support. but I cannot be able to get to the road where the bus is passing. How do I get to the road to catch up with the bus? I am told we need to work together. Let's work together to help those who cannot get to the road get there so that they can also catch up with the globalization process. Thank you very much.
There's coffee and pastries outside.
There's two things. We have Klaus Bernstein has a guest friend who's bringing one of her students. So we have to figure. We have to talk to Bernstein whether he wants to pay for her or what do we have to do. So she can't come into the sessions. The second is that in INASP, the rug guard people, the lady from the Library of Alexandria has come with her grad student, and we gave her a card that she hasn't paid more, and she's expecting the president of the Alexandria Library to come too, and she has to register him. Yeah. So the question.
Sarah Gelden?
I think so. So they're going to come in an hour.
Sarah
No, it was a guy. It was a guy.
Ismail Sarah Gelden?
Yeah.
He's the president of the library.
So the question is, do we charge him? Do we charge these grad students? And if so, I'll talk to Bernstein and Rudgard, not the individual people.
Excellent. Good.
So what do you want to do with it? You want me to approach Bernstein and Rudgard and let them know what do you want to do about? You want to cover these people?
Why don't you say, look, we are really desperate for money. Can the graduate students pay half? Can you cover half? Like 70?
Okay. And
Sarah Gelden. No, Sarah Gelden.
Yeah, the Egyptian guy. This is the lady. Hey, you're from the Library of My name is. We have told the president and now we're not sure someone you asked for someone gets it. So should we ask? Mr. Rudgard, FAO covered all of you. We have to ask to see if they'll cover him for registration.
Yep. I met her this before, yes. So she'll be the last one. We're in a small group.
Let's bring them up front so we can.
I think so, yes. I think more people will come in.
I think they will have them.
Oh, okay. People will just have to look at the thing. We've done that, yes. And what time to come back. Yes, because I'm sure there's lots of people out there that should be in here, really. No, I think you should stay down here. I think it's easier. And then just come up when you're ready. I had a couple of words of opening and then we can go. Is it good to start, you think? Yeah. I think someone's gone around already. Yes, good morning, everybody. I'd like to start this session since we're already a little bit late. My name is Peter Ballantyne, and I'm organising the next three sessions on behalf of INASP and the FAO. I'd like to request people maybe to come and sit further forward. We have a large room, and not so many people. It's more, where I live in Holland, we use the word gezellig. It's It's more gezellig to be kind of more together. So if you come and sit more kind of friendly. What I'm going to do is just do a very brief introduction to the 3 sessions, so you know what's going to be happening the rest of today under these sessions, and then I will hand over to the various speakers. The 3 sessions are generally under the title Accessing, Documenting and Disseminating Scientific Information for Development. This morning, between now and lunch, we will focus more on gaining and sustaining access, focus more on accessing science findings, and I'm going to look after that this session as the chair. We've had some changes in the names from the program because some people had unavoidable commitments, so they couldn't attend or they will be coming later. So I'm chairing this first session. After lunch, we'll focus more on publishing and disseminating science findings, and Martin Belcher from INASP will chair that one. And in the third session, the last session of the day, will be more about issues of bandwidth in relation to access and publishing, and Stephen Rutgard from FAO will chair that session. I was struck by the 3 words of this conference, past, present and future, and I think what's quite nice is we have a chance here to think about this, the past imperfect. Imperfect in terms of accessing and sharing and managing and documenting information. And one could say the present is quite tense, with a lot of different changes, a lot of revolutions going on in our communication and information and science. And I'm hoping at the end of this workshop, this conference perhaps, the future will become perfect. Who knows? So what we have today are about 13 presentations. It's quite a lot. What we've asked presenters to do is to be quite focused, to spend no more than 20 minutes talking, and to really, you can see there the scope, this is what they've been asked to talk about. And we've asked people not to give a lot of descriptive information about what they're doing, because that will be available on papers and presentations and pamphlets and handouts. So there will be some, of course, but we've asked people to bring, there will be a collection of materials later on. And we hope there's some time for some discussion. So we will be quite strict with the time for this presenter, so they only really have no more than 20 minutes to talk. Okay, this morning's session, and those are the 5 presenters, and what I propose to do is not to go through in detail now and introduce everybody, but to let each person, when they come up, introduce themselves very briefly if they want to. When I was in Africa recently, I was in South Africa and they were advertising the Big 5. As something that you do, you kind of shoot the most important animals in Africa. Now, I think we have here the Big 5.